Hello and welcome to Dateline London. The United States and peace, or rather the obvious lack of it in the Middle East. The balance between security and snooping and the epidemic of type 2 diabetes. Does Britain's National Health Service have an answer? My guests today are Nabila Ramdani, who's a French-Algerian journalist, Agnès Poirier of Marianne, Michael Goldfarb of globalpost.com, and Alex Dean of Conservative Home. Very good to see you. Well, the killings of 3 Israeli teenagers and then a young Palestinian boy. Rockets fired into Israel, bombing attacks on Gaza. Then, after a few days, the United States announced it would seek to broker a ceasefire. Is Washington asleep when it comes to the world's most intractable quarrel? I mean, you may say we don't look to Russia, we don't look to the EU, we don't look to Tony Blair, so at least people still look to Washington for some guidance on this. But they've been incredibly slow.
But, Gavin, what can they do? I mean, in the end, you ask the question, I could ask the question back. What is it really that Washington can do? I mean, one of the things that is, it's sadly clear after 45 years, is that Washington can bring a tremendous amount of pressure to bear when both sides are interested in talking. You can get a deal like you had between Begin and Sadat, and then Sadat gets shot. You can have a deal like you had between Rabin and Arafat. Rabin gets shot. You can invite Ehud Barak and Arafat to talks, and within 18 months, Barak is voted out of office. How far can Washington go? And in this particular case, don't forget that John Kerry became Secretary of State, said, my goal is to create new talks. He failed utterly. But is his failure his, or is it because both sides are now in a place with political leadership that actually, in a very perverse sense to those of us who are outside it, get something out of this? It's clear that Netanyahu gets something out of this. I mean, we didn't mention much. Avigdor Lieberman, his foreign minister, broke up, it's not the coalition, but the voting bloc he had with the Likud several days before this advance began. Hamas had joined forces with Fatah, and this was going to change the whole picture, but not really, because Hamas felt then it had made itself isolated, so it got something out of launching rockets that were only going to bring forth this response. This response is much more about the rockets that have landed and the escalation from these 2 deaths. And really, I don't think any outside force can get in there and do anything. It is really down to the 2 peoples involved to say, our political leadership is leading us down a corridor from which the only exit is in a coffin. And until that happens, the US has no role.
But you seem, Nabila, from the outside, that perhaps one would say that both sides are looking for some kind of victory, where victory is clearly impossible. I mean, the Palestinians are not going to go away, and Israel is not going to go away, and so somehow they've got to deal with each other.
Well, to answer your preliminary question, I would contend that Washington is not asleep, but pretending to be. Relaxed indifference has been America's default position as far as the Arab-Israeli conflict is concerned for years. And Washington may be concerned about the murdering of Palestinians, who knows? But it is far more concerned about the maintenance of the Israeli security state, because a great deal of American power, American firepower, and indeed American money make sure that it is as strong as possible. And Obama knows that Israel's Iron Dome, its rockets, its bombers, its tankers, its nuclear warheads, its missile defenses, and the rest of it will keep Israel well ahead of Palestinian rockets, and it will continue the killing. Look at the figures. We've just heard the news. More than 100 Palestinians have been killed, the vast majority of them innocent civilians, women and children. More than 700 people have been injured. There's a humanitarian crisis going on, with Israeli MPs now calling for electricity, water supplies and medical supplies to be cut out. And in the face of such a grim reality, we're hearing the Prime Minister of Israel saying that he will not be stopped by international pressure, and he's threatening ground offensive. This is a display, a sinister display of smug invincibility. And
but if the Palestinians, if the Hamas people stop firing rockets, would that not be a game changer?
Gavin,
I mean, it seems to be a zero-sum game.
It is easy to portray Hamas as a terrorist organization, and nobody would condone firing rockets into Israel under any circumstances, but the threat of Israeli life is met with the actual loss of considerable civilian lives in Gaza,
Nabila,
and nobody should underestimate the abject savagery which underpins this round of violence.
The sequence of events, though,
and the worst of it comes from Israel.
The sequence of events was the 3 Israeli teenagers were abducted.
Palestinians would dispute that. The sequence of events, the immediate sequence of events, can even go back to May, when 3 Palestinian teenagers were shot dead at a checkpoint.
My point is,
we don't even know.
At a certain point, listen,
Michael,
Nabila,
we don't even know who murdered the Israeli teenagers.
Please, look. Listen, I've heard the Hamas spokesman already infer that this was somehow an Israeli action to kill 3 children. No, this is not going to help. But my point was that when
finish, Nabila, and then I'll come back to you.
When the Palestinian teenager, in revenge, was abducted from Shafat and murdered in a terrible way, there was this global abhorrence. And rather than taking that moment, the Hamas leadership, when it had actually, the world has had 48 hours, starts lobbing in the rockets. What is the purpose of doing that?
That is a fair point. But even if Palestinians, they're still unknown criminals, those behind the killings, the gruesome murder of 3 Israeli youths. Even if Palestinians were behind it, surely the only democracy in the Middle East, as it likes to call itself, should bring those criminals, deal with them through the rule of law and due process, and not have Netanyahu call for actual blood and revenge at the very funeral of those teenagers.
Alex?
I don't really think, and I'm not Israeli or not Jewish, I'm not Palestinian, and as an outsider to that conflict, I don't really, as an observer, accept the idea of equivalence, or that there's equivalence in the death count, as was just implied. Israel shields its civilians with military tools.
Precisely. Where are the shelters in Gaza? I mean,
forgive me, I wasn't finished. My point was to contrast what Israel does to shield civilians with its military tools, in contrast with Hamas, who shield terror tools with civilians. That is, they push civilians to the front, they put them on tops of buildings when Israelis threaten strikes. They would prefer to have civilians and have their deaths.
But Gaza is one of the most densely populated places on earth. There is nowhere else to go.
But there is nowhere else to go in the whole of, when you talk about getting outside of Gaza.
They're targeting journalists, Alex. Colleagues of mine died in the last round of violence.
Israel has developed tools that display by sound, by sight, by noise that they're about to strike a building, and Hamas pushes people back into those areas so as to ensure that there are civilian casualties.
What do you make of it?
Apology for cutting you out. I just wanted to agree with you, actually. Because Israel is a democracy. Hamas is a terrorist organization. It's easy to say, but it's the truth. I mean, it's a fact. And also now, you said, is Washington asleep? Is the Arab League asleep? What about this, the Arab silence? Right. It's deafening. I mean, we're talking about the West.
They call for a meeting with the UN.
There's not much we can do, actually. I mean, yesterday President Hollande was on the phone with Netanyahu, and, that's all they can do, actually. Mahmoud Abbas. That's all they can do, be on the phone to them and say, please, calm down. Please, a lot of people are being killed.
Just to go back to Michael's point, because I think it was a very interesting one, it does serve quite a lot of interest to see this conflict continue, does it not? It actually serves quite a lot of people. It serves some people within Israel and some people within the Palestinian camp too.
Well, let's make no mistake about what this current crisis is about. And it's not tit for tat between Hamas and Israel. It's about the wider picture. It's about a free and independent state for the Palestinians. It's about the brutality of military occupation, 47 years, the longest in modern history. It's about apartheid policies exemplified by that porous wall separating communities. It's about illegal land grabbing and illegal settlements built on that stolen land, effectively. It's about the day-to-day humiliation of oppression. It's about the effective siege of Gaza. Israel effectively still controls all the key to what David Cameron called an open-air prison. Its land borders, its airs,
But it's
everything.
also...
Do you agree with quite a lot of that?
Listen, in Israel, the voices, I'm going to get emails about this from friends, the peace camp is still there, and it's there in the diaspora. But it's also about the complete failure of several generations of Palestinian politicians to deal with what is real and what is possible within the context.
Palestinian politicians have given 78% to Israel of historical Palestine.
Nabila,
it's about time that Israel was criminalized and treated like an international pariah for its continuous murderous policies.
Nabila, listen. Possibly the stupidest thing the UN has ever done was to grant to the PLO this status of being the sole legitimate voice of the Palestinian people. Because what it did is it condemned the Palestinian people in this occupation to a politics built on a one-party state. There was no possibility of dissident voices. All of the money that was coming from international organizations went through Fatah,
and when
the PLO.
You have unity government, alliances between different factions.
No, it doesn't work.
It
doesn't work that way, and it hasn't worked that way. And that's why there hasn't been. I'm sorry to carry on, Gavin, but it gets to me. In the there had to have been a better way beside violence. When one is, as you have so accurately portrayed, international condemnation. No, that means nothing.
Of course it
Satyagraha.
does. There are international bodies that deal with the law.
India, and Satyagraha worked. We're celebrating the 50th anniversary of the Civil Rights Act in America. It would have served the Palestinian people better to take a non-violent path and accept the pain that comes with it than to continue to fight and accept
deal with the pain that comes with it. In the face of climbing and harrowing casualties, we are hearing somebody talking about Palestinian violence. This is what this is all about, the PR spin on it.
Okay, we'll leave it there.